النقاط التنظيمية من فضلكم. رجاء إبقاء الميكروفون الخاص بكم في إلا عند المشاركة بالكلام، ورجاء أيضا
Keep
رفع
it silent unless you are speaking, and if you want to express an idea or participate, kindly raise your hand. And here I would like to ask Mr. Burqadi to turn his microphone off. I believe your microphone is on and it is noisy. Thank you very much. You may also address the organizers and the moderator of the session through the chat function or the chat box at any time you wish to do so. This session also includes translation in all three languages, Arabic, French, and English, and you can thus follow presentations and the general discussion on any language you want using the interpretation function, which is at the bottom of the screen. You can see the globe logo, and next to it, it says interpretation. So you click on that and you select the language. So first of all, thank you very much. Good evening once again. I am pleased and honored to facilitate the works of this session on SDG implementation audit in the Arab region. So very quickly, I would like to remind you of the objectives of this session. The higher bodies for accounting and financial supervision are national authorities entrusted with monitoring the quality of relevant data. And so their discipline and specializations vary from one government to another. And these bodies can play a vital role in the implementation of the Sustainable Development 2030 plan when it comes to review and monitoring, as well as promotion of transparency and accountability. And so in that context, this session had three main aims. The first objective is linked to improving awareness and understanding of the work of these bodies and following up on, reviewing, and monitoring the implementation of the 2030 agenda. The second objective is the establishment of a dialogue between the higher supervision bodies on one hand and CSOs and other stakeholders in the region on the other, in order to create more harmony and synergy, thus assisting the implementation of the 2030 plan. This is a joint dialogue which brings together all stakeholders and development partners. Objective number 3 is to highlight the main outcomes of the readiness audits conducted by a number of Arab countries, as well as the importance of the audit process in the implementation of SDG 3, which has to do with public health, as well as the readiness of governments to meet health requirements. So first of all, before we delve into the details of each of these objectives with our distinguished speakers, allow me to give the floor to Ms. Karima Al-Qurri, head of the team that focuses on the 2030 plan as well as SDGs at ASQA. Ms. Karima, the floor is yours. Go ahead. You have around 3 minutes, please. Thank you very much. Mr. Chair, Your Excellency, Mr. Najib Al-Qattari, Secretary General of Arabosai, Ms. Asana Shitra, representative of IDI, August Assembly, I am pleased on behalf of the ASQA to welcome you to this special session on SDG implementation audit for the Arab region. This special session is considered one of the first activities organized by ASQA along with the Arab organization, Arabosai Arab Organization for Arab higher bodies for monitoring and financial supervision. And this session is part of an MOU signed by ASQA and Arabosai, which aims at promoting the role of these higher bodies for financial supervision and accounting in Arab countries.
Pour un suivi et pour une révision, pour une mise en œuvre.
2030 وأهدافها ال17. وتأتي هذه الجلسة ضمن جهود الأسكوا المستمرة
is part of the ongoing efforts by ESCWA to expand the scope of participation and contribution to the expediting of the 2030 plan according to one of the main principles in this plan, which is to further promote partnership amongst the various stakeholders and guarantee the participation of the civil society as well as other stakeholders in order to achieve sustainable development in all countries. This partnership is particularly important with these higher bodies as they play a vital role in promoting competency, efficacy, or efficiency, if you will, transparency and accountability, which is a huge part of the 2030 development plan through the establishment of effective and accountable institutions, which is at the heart of the 16th goal of the SDGs. And this has been reaffirmed through the VNRs or voluntary national reports, which highlight the importance of role distribution in national dialogues on all stakeholders, including higher bodies for accounting and financial supervision. They are not new players, but rather a vital part of the SDG implementation by assuming their responsibilities in terms of supervision, audit, and accountability. And these bodies, through their independent audits that they carry out, monitor the efforts deployed by the various governments and thus encourage them to take all of the necessary measures in order for these measures and procedures to go in line with the 2030 agenda, as well as establish all of the institutional frameworks that are required to do so. Dear guests, the participation of these bodies in the AFSD is a valuable opportunity to deepen the dialogue between the various stakeholders in the implementation of the Sustainable Development Plan, including CSOs, parliaments, and others. This forum is a yearly event for the various stakeholders in order to take stock of the progress achieved in the 2030 agenda at different levels while discussing its various components and also reinforcing the culture of exchange and spirituality of cooperation amongst the various stakeholders. The 2030 agenda is important because it is comprehensive and applicable in the various countries. While development levels vary from one Arab country to another, our challenges are very similar, more so than ever before. And so we are all striving and working for a better future, for a better tomorrow. We are working to put an end to the COVID-19 pandemic. And so this is why the 2030 agenda in all of its components, principles, approaches, and partners remains the best roadmap to guide our work and our journey in our imminent exit from the COVID-19 pandemic and for a better future. I thank you once again, wishing you success and a fruitful session. Thank you very much, Ms. Karima Al-Qurri.
Dear participants, that there is a simultaneous interpretation from in three languages, from Arabic, English, and French, for those who just join us to this special session. شكرا يهمني ويشرفني الآن.
Thank you very much. I am now honored and pleased to give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Najib Al-Khattari, Secretary General of Arabosai. And he will be speaking to us about the importance of Arabosai to SDGs. Mr. Khattari, the floor is yours. Your Excellency, Mr. Najib Al-Khattari, the floor is yours. You may begin. Can you hear me? Mr. Al-Khattari, can you hear me?
لو سمحتم وبانتظار أن
Seems Mr. Al-Khattari is not with us. So while we wait for him to rejoin, while we wait for the Arabosai Secretary General to join us once again, allow me to now give the floor to Ms. Ashana Shirset, Deputy Secretary General for the Intosai. So, Ms. Arshana, the floor is yours. You may go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Karam. A very good afternoon to everyone. I hope you and yours are safe and healthy in these challenging times. On behalf of the Intosai Development Initiative, it's my pleasure and privilege to welcome each of you to this special session on auditing SDGs in the Arab region. I speak from the perspective of Intosai, which is the International Organization of Supreme Audit Institutions, and IDI, which is its development initiative. And at Intosai and IDI, we work together for an effective, accountable, and inclusive Supreme Audit institutions in every nation such that they add value and benefits for all. Supreme Audit
que
Institutions.
ces initiatives soient bénéfiques à tout le monde. En fait, les organisations et les institutions supérieures de contrôle sont les institutions suprêmes dans chaque pays. Et donc, ces institutions sont des acteurs naturels dans n'importe quelle entrevue de suivi pour la mise en œuvre de l'agenda 2030 et des organisations de développement durable. En fait, l'Intosai est une organisation formée de 194 membres de partout dans le monde. Et en fait, les institutions d'audit font partie intégrante de cette organisation. L'organisation de l'Intosai reconnaît l'importance de l'agenda 2030 lorsque ou dès le début de cet agenda. Et nous avons inclus les ODD comme priorité essentielle dans le plan stratégique de l'Intosai pour la période allant de 2017 à 2022. En fait, l'Intosai appelle ses membres à contribuer au suivi des ODD dans le cadre du contexte de chacune de ces nations pour en fait faire avancer les efforts des ODD et des mandats individuels. En tant que contribution à l'Intosai et aux efforts de l'Intosai, l'initiative IBI avait supporté et soutenu en fait plus de 70 institutions supérieures de contrôle de finances publiques. Le cadre d'audit était basé sur le cadre pionnier et les rapports, et en fait, les résultats des rapports ont montré que les institutions suprêmes de contrôle avaient appelé les gouvernements à prendre les actions nécessaires. Désolée, Madame Arshana, M. Munji, veuillez bien.
On off, Mr. Munji. Yes, I will turn it off now. Yes, go ahead, Mr. Arshana.
Unmute yourself, please, Mrs. Arshana.
Yes. Okay. The results from the preparedness audit conducted across the world show that SAIs have urged governments into action. They have provided recommendations for enhancing preparedness. They have contributed to raising awareness among citizens and stakeholders. And in many instances, the SAIs have been consulted in the VNR process by the governments. The SAI community has now moved from focusing on auditing implementation, from auditing preparedness to auditing implementation. And the COVID-19 pandemic which has upturned our world, has made it important for us to stay relevant by focusing on contributing to efforts to build back better. The IDI efforts today consist of helping SAIs in building back better by facilitating audits on public health resilience, sustainable public procurement, and elimination of intimate partner violence. I would just like to recollect as I end what the ECOSOC president said at the HLPF in July 2020. The recovery phase for the pandemic represents an opportunity for all levels of government to build back more inclusive, equal, resilient, and sustainable societies. And as a SAI community, we are committed to working together with all stakeholders to contribute to building back better through our independent evidence-based audit work. So for our people in Arabosai, I would like to say, let us join forces, let us join voices so that we can all contribute to build back better. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Arshana Shirsat. اسمحوا لي الآن أن أعطي الكلام.
Allow me now to give the floor to Mr. Najib Al-Qattari, Secretary General of the Arab side, the floor is yours. Go ahead. Thank you very much. Apologies for the technical difficulties that we've faced. In the name of God, most gracious, most merciful, Your Excellency, Mr. Faisal bin Fadl Ibrahim,
السيدة أمينة محمد نائبة الأمين العام للأمم المتحدة.
Amina Mohammed, Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations, Your Excellency, Mr. Ahmad Abul Ghait, Secretary General of the Arab League, Mr. Rela Jechi, Secretary of the Deputy Secretary General of the ESQA, Your Excellencies, representatives and heads of state, honorable participants in this event. Hello to all. It is my pleasure and honor to meet you today in this forum, which truly expresses the aspirations of the Arab world and all of its components for a better future that preserves human dignity and our rights to education, well-being, and health, while also combating poverty and the various problems that we face in our world. And so this is why we work in partnership with our various international partners and stakeholders in the framework of the 2030 agenda elaborated by the United Nations. And on this occasion, I am pleased on my behalf and on behalf of the Arabo side, I would like to extend my thanks and appreciation to the ESQA for their generous and auspicious hosting of this event with our participation. It is our first participation, the AFSD, as part of the partnership agreement that we have signed through the MOU with the Arabusa and ESQA as part of the 2030 agenda with the participation of the various Arab countries which have given it great importance. And Intosai was entrusted by the United Nations to follow up on the implementation of this agenda, and which has included all SDGs in its 2022 as a holistic process when it comes to the monitoring of the various states and governments and their implementation of the SDGs.
En fait, je voudrais également remercier Excellence.
Members of the Arab organization and your efforts in activating the various objectives of this organization while also providing support to your respective governments when it comes to the implementation and achievement of SDGs, which have become a priority for our organization. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, forum participants, allow me to seize this opportunity to discuss some of our policies. The Arab organization is one of 7 regional bodies which are members of the Intosai, and they reflect the mandate of the Intosai regionally. Their objectives, or our objectives, include promoting cooperation between the various SCI members, provide them with technical assistance and support, awareness raising, which further promotes the roles of these SCIs. And we are working towards opening up our work and our efforts to the various stakeholders in the region to provide support to governments and thus meet the aspirations of our people for a better tomorrow. Also, finding new means on how to benefit most from the various stakeholders, which would promote the role of the members body, and this is a perfect opportunity to launch this dialogue with the SCIs as well as government officials, CSOs, and other stakeholders in the region in order to create more opportunities for synergy and harmony in line with the 2030 Agenda implementation. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, participants, honorable guests, in light of what the world is witnessing today, we are compelled more than ever before to deploy and double our efforts in order to overcome the problems of today and achieve the well-being of our peoples. And our meeting today reaffirms our commitment to our work in finding means and solutions and building bridges of trust and confidence between citizens and their governments. And so this is an opportunity for Arab countries to exchange expertise with the various stakeholders, of course. And it is no secret that this pandemic has highlighted the deficiencies as well as the humanitarian crisis that the region is undergoing in the context of the overarching sense of poverty in the region. And this is why we need to provide our governments and countries with the support that they need. And this is why the implementation of SDGs is more important today than ever before. We are honored to share our success stories and experience in the field of audit and supervision. And that is in the framework of the support that we provide to governments in their recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. And in our meeting, we will try to highlight the vital role played by these institutions in the implementation of the 2030 Agenda through the audit and review process, which would promote transparency and accountability. In conclusion, I would like to extend my thanks to all of the organizers once again, wishing you success in this event for a better, stronger partnership with the ESCWA and other stakeholders, asking God to help you in your endeavors and for a better future for us all. Thank you once again. Thank you, Your Excellency, Mr. Najib Al-Khattari, Secretary General of the Arab Organization, for supreme audit bodies. I would like to pick up on what you mentioned at the conclusion of your speech, which is the objective of the coming sessions with a number of panelists in order to answer or to respond to the various roles played by these institutions. So allow me, first of all, to introduce you to the participants. We have Mr. Mohammed bin Hamdan bin Saeed, Mohammed Al-Jabiri, an audit expert at the Sultanate of Oman, with the government of Oman. We also have Mr. Abdul Hakim bin Lazraq, Prime Director in Accounting and Financial Supervision as part of the Intosai Development Initiative in Norway. We have Ms. Majdolin Sammour, Head of the Performance Supervision Department in Palestine. We also have Mr. Muhammad Abdul Mohsen Hanin, Head of the Head of Branch at the Fourth Chamber of Accounting in Morocco. We also have Mr. Saad Al-Burqadi, tasked with this mission by the Prime Minister of the Moroccan government. So the ladies and the gentlemen will be answering some of the main axes that were defined for this special session, with the focus on the role of higher audit bodies. What are their characteristics in the SDG process, and similar questions. And so in my first question, I would like to address Mr. Hamad Al-Jabiri, audit and supervision expert at the Administrative and Financial Audit Institution in Oman. So my question to you: what is the role of these institutions in the Arab region, and to what extent are they participating in the implementation of the 2030 Agenda? Kindly answer this question rather directly and within a maximum of 5 minutes. The floor is yours. In the name of God, most gracious, most merciful, thank you, Mr. Karam, for this introduction, and I extend my thanks to the organizers for allowing me to participate. I would like to point out, first and foremost, that these institutions are autonomous. And so, in general, these are the governmental institutions capable of following up on and monitoring the implementation of the SDGs. Thus, since the Sustainable Development Plan is a global plan launched by the United Nations, INTOSAI responded to this call, to this international call, and dedicated a special discussion for this subject. And as part of the INTOSAI strategic plan for the years 2017-2022, institutions were compelled to follow up and monitor the implementation of the 17 SDGs. And this is why these Arab institutions are not excluded from this process naturally, along with the various ENTOSAI members. And here I would like to refer to one of the audit standards, number 12, namely, which has to do with the value and benefits of these higher institutions, which reaffirms the importance and of the vital role played by these institutions before citizens and the government. And so in general, we summarize the roles and responsibilities of these audit bodies when it comes to the SDGs and their implementation. And here I would like to, it is worth mentioning here that we also follow up on the readiness of these governments when it comes to the implementation of the SDGs. Objective 2, performance assessment and supervision when it comes to SDG implementation. And so the supervision over the implementation of these SDGs, which has begun already. Another important role is the contribution to SDG 16, which stipulates the establishment of effective, transparent, and accountable institutions. Objective number 4 is the accountability role to be played by these institutions, being autonomous, independent institutions which work towards assessing governmental performance and providing assistance to the governments and the implementation of the SDGs. And as Mr. Najib mentioned, it is worth pointing out that Arabosai has played a major role up until now by establishing a specialized supervision committee for the implementation of the SDGs. And this commission or committee has conducted a number of activities, including a manual on how to audit SDG implementation through Entosai, of course. Additionally, Arabosai plays two major roles, namely ongoing awareness raising regarding the importance of SDGs and considering them as priorities. So this was one of the main objectives, and the second is to provide assistance to the various members in order to assess the readiness of their governments in implementing SDGs. And a number of Arab bodies responded to that and have indeed evaluated a number of governments in that sense. However, due to time constraints, I would like to point out that some challenges remain. It is thus very important for government bodies and civil societies together to realize the importance of
les institutions d'audit, parce que sans coopération et sans données nécessaires,
يتم الإنجاز أو لن يكون هناك
these institutions and bodies will not be able to effectively monitor the implementation of the SDGs, because as you know, this is a holistic, comprehensive effort. Other challenges remain as well. such as establishing a clear understanding of SDGs and their implementation in the Arab region.
ربما نشير إلى بعض التحديات اللي هي الصلاحيات القانونية المفوضة
Another challenge is the
تحديد
legal prerogatives given to
القواعد
these
والمراجعة
institutions, which require review and revision in some instances,
استخدامه مجال واسع ومختلف
since sustainable development is a very broad, varied topic. Thus, these
التي تخصص
audit institutions must be imbued with all of the prerogatives and powers, legally speaking, that they need in order to fulfill their role. Another challenge is capacity building when it comes to monitoring and supervision of implementation. And this is what Intosai, IDI, as well as Arabosai are doing in that regard. I believe I have run out of time.
انتهى الوقت. شكرا. سنعود إليك
Yes, indeed.
سيدي بجولة ثانية من الأسئلة. ولو سمحت افتح لي الآن لأن أطرح سؤال
Allow me
آخر
now
كما تفضلت به.
to ask another question to complement
بالتأكيد بالنظر
what you have said so far.
حول
So to ask Mr. Abdel Hakim about how is audit different when it comes to the implementation of the SDGs compared with other types of supervision done by the other audit institutes. You have the floor,
بسم
sir,
الله الرحمن
in around
الرحيم
5 minutes. In the
شكرا لك
name of God,
سيدة
most gracious,
الوداع
most merciful. Thank you, Mr.
السلام عليكم
Karam.
جميعا
Hello, good
كان
afternoon, everyone.
التركيز على السؤال
As an answer to
أن
your question,
التحقيق على تنفيذ أهداف التنمية
the
المستدامة
audit on the
هو
implementation of the
تدقيق الأهداف
SDGs is an audit
وكما
of
أشار
performance.
معالي سعادة الأمير في
And
الاندفاعي
the
أن
IDI
هناك 4
sees
خصائص
that there are
تميز
four
التحقيق على
characteristics
تنفيذ أهداف
that
التنمية المستدامة
differentiate the audit when it
عن
comes to the
غيره
implementation
من
of the
عمليات
SDGs
تنفيذ الأهداف الأخرى
compared to other types of
والتي
audit
تقوم
performance or
بها
performance
الأجهزة
audit
العليا
done
للرقابة.
by
هذه
Supreme Audit
الخصائص
Institutes. These
مستمدة من
characteristics
خطة
are
رؤية
or
2030
emanate from the 2030
وسأحاول
agenda, and I will
تناولها
try
باختصار.
to showcase them briefly.
أولا التدقيق على تنفيذ أهداف
First,
التنمية
the
المستدامة
audit on the implementation of
هو
the
تدقيق
SDGs
على النتائج
is
الوطنية
an audit on the national
المتحققة
results that
بمقاصد
are
أهداف
related
التنمية المستدامة،
to the
فهو
sustainable
ليس
development goals.
التدقيق على البرامج
So this is not an audit
والمشاريع
on programs
والتعهدات
or
السياسية
projects or on
وإنما
institutions
هو تدقيق
individually. It is rather an
على
audit on
التنفيذ
how they interact together and among each other
الإنتاجية
in order to
الوطنية.
realize and achieve national
هذا
results.
بالنسبة للخاصية الأولى.
This is for the first
بالنسبة
characteristic.
للخاصية
Now,
الثانية
for the second
فهي
characteristic,
تتعلق
it
باستخدام
has to
مناهج
do with
الحكومة
the
الشاملة،
use of
حيث تتطلب
the
تحقيق
national
نتيجة معينة
plans.
استدامة
A
نظام
good
سياسي.
result depends on the
لذلك
contribution of a holistic
فإن
and
التدقيق على
total
تنفيذ
system.
أهداف التنمية
This is why the
المستدامة
audit on the
يحتاج
implementation of the
إلى
SDGs
استخدام نهج الحكومة الشاملة،
needs a
نهج
holistic
ينظر في نظام إدارة
plan and
الدولة
approach for
وفي
the government.
مسؤولياته
It has
وفي
to do
القدرات
with the methods of
وفي توفر
implementation,
البيانات
capacities,
داخل النظام
and the availability of the data
ولا يفوتني
within every
بالمرة
system. And I
أن
have also
فحص
to mention
التنسيق
here
الأفقي
that
عبر الوزارات
the
المعنية
horizontal,
والتماسك مع أسلاك
examining horizontal
مختلفة
coherence
باستخدام
across different
البرامج
ministries and vertical
هو أحد
coherence between different
الجوانب
levels of government
الأساسية
is a key
لعمليات التدقيق.
aspect of such.
الخاصية الثالثة
The third
تخص
characteristic
مشاركة
has to
أصحاب
do with
المصلحة،
engaging
إذ
the multiple
يتطلب
stakeholders.
تحقيق النتائج مشاركة
Realizing the outcomes
أصحاب المصلحة
required the
المتعددة،
involvement of the different
وهذا أيضا
stakeholders.
أحد
And this is
مكامن
also
خطة
one of the
2030.
principles of the
ولذلك
2030 agenda.
يحتاج المدقق
This is
إلى
why
قياس جهود الحكومة
an auditor
بضمان مشاركة
or the audit of
وإشراك
the SDG
أصحاب المصلحة.
implementation examines how the government has ensured the
وفي
participation of
الواقع
multi-stakeholder
فمن
government.
جهته
And the auditor of the
فالمدقق
SDG
ذاته عند
implementation needs to
قيامه
engage
بعملية
state and
التدقيق
non-state actors in the
يحتاج
audit
إلى
process.
إشراك الجهات الفاعلة
So the
سواء
actors
الحكومية
needed to be
أو غير
involved. Here
الحكومية
we're talking about
كي
state and
يمكنه
non-state
دخول
actors
أعلى
so that
مستويات
the maximum
الرقابة.
audit impact can be
ثم
reached.
الخاصية الرابعة
The fourth
والأخيرة
and
فهي
last
تتعلق
characteristic
بمبدأ
has
عدم
to
ترك
do with
حد
the principle of
الفراغ،
leaving
حيث
no one
كما
behind.
تعلمون
As you
لا
know,
يمكن تحقيق أي نتيجة وطنية
any
إذا
national
تم
outcome cannot be
إدخال
achieved
انتقاء الفئات الأكثر
by leaving behind the most vulnerable
لذلك
categories.
يسأل
This is
التحقيق
why
على
the
تنفيذ
audit
أهداف التنمية المستدامة
of the
عن
SDGs
كيفية
implementation
قياس
asks
الحكومات
how governments
بتحديد
do
الشرائح الهشة
identify
والمهمشة
the vulnerable and marginalized
وكذلك
sections of
يسأل
society.
التحقيق
And the
على
audit
كيفية
also asks
اتخاذ
about
التدابير
how to take the
المناسبة
necessary and appropriate
لفائدة
measures
هذه
for
الشرائح.
the benefit of those
هذا باختصار
categories. And this
أهم
is,
ما يميز
in brief,
التحقيق على تنفيذ
these
أهداف
were
التنمية
the main
المستدامة.
characteristics of the
شكرا
audit of the
على الاستماع.
SDGs
شكرا.
implementation. Thank you for your attention.
شكرا السيد بن لزرق
Thank you,
على
Mr. Ben
هذه
Lazraq,
التوضيحات هذا أكثر
for
من
this
توضيح ومبسطة
very clear intervention, very direct
وتوضح على
intervention.
أهمية
You
التحقيق
shed the light on the
والمراعاة
characteristics of audit
لتعزيز
when it
أهداف
comes
التنمية
to the
المستدامة عن
implementation of
التطبيق
the
التكنيكي الذي
SDGs
تقوم به أجهزة
and
mise en œuvre des ODD en comparaison avec les
move now to the third speaker, Mr. Muhammad Abdel Mohsen.
السؤال الذي أوجهه إليك
And
السيد
my question to you,
محمد عبد
Sir,
المحسن حنين
Mr. Muhammad
هو
Abdel
حول
Mohsen
الإشكالية
Hanin, is
الأساسية
about the
التي تم
main
طرحها خلال
problem
مهمة
that,
تطوير
or
جهوزية
the
الحكومة
main
والمجتمع في الحكومة
aspect
المغربية والحكومة
when
التونسية
that was
وكيف
addressed when we
تم
talk
الإجابة
about
عن هذه الإشكالية
uh,
فما لك في
when
خطوات
when the
الاستطلاع
different
والتقييم
countries were involved, specifically
شكرا
Morocco. You have five
شكرا.
minutes. Thank you, Mr. Karam.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته.
Hello,
بسم
good
الله الرحمن
afternoon.
الرحيم.
Peace and blessings of God be
بالنسبة
upon you.
للمجلس الأعلى للحسابات فقد تم
For
تحديد
the
الإشكالية الأساسية
SAI,
المتعلقة بمهمة
there was
تحقيق
the
المراقبة
problem about
الجاهزية في
the,
إطار
the
سؤالين
control of
أساسيين،
preparedness within two
وهما هل
frameworks.
اتخذت الحكومة تدابير
And the question
لازمة
was, did
وناجعة
the
في
government
أهداف
take
التنمية
the
المستدامة؟
necessary measures for the
وهل النظام الاقتصادي
SC?
الوطني قادر على
And
إنتاج
is
بيانات
the
وأهداف
national
للحصول على
census
تأشيرات
capable of
واقتراع؟
collecting data when it comes to,
وعليه فمهمة تقييم جاهزية
and
الحكومة
this is
أخذت
why the
الإجابة على
evaluation
السؤالين
was made
الرئيسيين
by the government in order to
خلال
answer the
الوقوف
main
على
questions
التدابير
by taking
المختلفة
stock of the different
بمختلف
measures
المجالين سواء على المستوى
taken
الاستراتيجي أو على
at
المستوى
the level of
الاستخدامي،
at the
وذلك لضمان
level and
إطار
the
دائرة
institutional
تحديد
level, and
الأولويات
in order
والتقنية والتنسيق
to
التكنيكي.
determine the priorities and
وكذا تقييم
what
قدرة النظام الإحصائي
done.
الوطني على إنتاج
The national
البيانات اللازمة
census has
ورصد
been keen
المؤشرات
on
الإملاء.
including the different indicators,
ولكن
indices,
بالنسبة
and
للمجلس فمن
data.
المهم كذلك
For
أن
the
يكون التحقيق الذي
council,
يتطلب لإنتاج
audit
الأشياء والمعلومات
has to
بحيث
be
يعطي
balanced
صورة واضحة
so that it
وكذلك
could
على
clear
إنجازات
idea
وتمت الحكومة
about
على اعتبار أن المناقشة
what the
في
government
الأهداف
has done,
الرئيسية
because the
لها
government has started
والوقوف
to
على
realize the
برامج
SDGs and take
القصور
stock of
وبالتالي
what has been
الخصوصيات.
lacking, and therefore,
وللإجابة على هذه الإشكالية
and
وهذه
in order to
التحديات
answer these
تم
questions,
اعتماد منهجية السبع خطوات معتمدة من
there was
خلال
the
SDGs
seven-step methodology that was
والتي
adopted,
تم صياغتها في
and
إطار
it
مجموعة من
was
الأسئلة الفرعية
formulated by
المتعلقة بانشهار القطاع
creating a set
السياسي
of questions
والمساءلة
related to the
ومجالات
political
أخرى من
framework and
إطار المتعلق
accountability,
بالبيانات.
in addition
فيما
to the
يخص
framework
الإطار
related to data.
السياسي والمساءلة
Regarding the political
فقد
framework
حاولنا
and
الوقوف على مدى
accountability, we
الالتزام
have tried
السياسي
to take
للحكومة
stock about the
وكذلك الوعي العام
of
بالأهداف
government
من
and
طرف
how to
الحكومة وكذلك
work on the
المستفيدين من
SDGs
القطاع
by the
الخاص
government and
والإشراك
by the
جميع ذوي
private
المصلحة في هذا
sector
الإطار
by involving all the
وكذا تحديد
framework.
مسؤولياتهم وطرق التمويل وكذلك
And
الخطط
it was
لإدارة
important
ذلك.
to elaborate
أما
the
فيما يتعلق
different plans in order to
بالإطار
achieve these
المالي فقد
issues.
حاول الوقوف
Now,
على
we have
وجود أنظمة
also tried
القياس
to
المؤشرات
take
وكذلك
stock about
الترتيبات التي تم
the
اعتمادها في هذا الإطار
measure
وكذلك
systems for
ممارسة
the
الربط
different
والتمثيلين
data
من
in
خلال
order
الحصول
also to
على المعطيات
receive the
وكذلك
necessary
تحديد
data
المؤشرات
and to
والمراقبة
determine
ومتابعتها
the
وإبلاغها.
indices, indicators, and to be able
ومن
to
أجل
monitor
الوصول
and
كذلك
control them. And
للنتائج
in
المطلوبة
order
في
to
إطار
reach
هذه المهمة
the results that
فأشير
are
إلى النطاق المهم للخدمة
required,
للوزارات والمؤسسات الحكومية
a set of
التي تم اختيارها
ministries
وفقا
have
للضرورة
been
في
chosen
عملية التنسيق وكذلك التتبع وضرورة
in
تحقيق الأشياء
a
المستهدفة
coordinated manner
وكذلك توفر
for the
الأنظمة
monitoring process,
المعلومات المتعلقة بها وكذلك الأنظمة الإحصائية في إنتاج
and
معطيات متعلقة بها.
also several statistical
وهناك
systems were taken
مقاصد
into
طبعا
consideration in this field. There
رئيسية
is
متعلقة بمجلس الحسابات هو اختيار
the
العمل على
issue
هدفين كذلك في هذا الإطار.
of
الأهداف المتعلقة بالصحة
audit
الهدف رقم 4 متعلق
was
بالتعليم
taken into
من أجل
consideration,
الوقوف
and
على المدى
specifically
القصير
goal number
والمدى
4
الطويل
to take
لأهداف
stock of the
هذين
preparedness of the
الهدفين
government to
بحيث تشمل تحقيق
achieve
الإنجازات
goal number 2 and
وتحقيق
goal
الأهداف
number
الاستراتيجية في
4,
الإطار
and to
السياسي
look at what
والقانوني
is
وهناك
missing at the
مشاركة
legal
قوية
level and the
من
financial
الحكومة
level.
المعنية بهذا الأمر وكذلك
the civil society has taken part in this issue, and there was coordination
gouvernementale et nous avons pu réunir et collecter des
forces were taken into consideration from the IDI and from the INTSI, and we held several meetings and several field visits and several seminars to take stock of what is happening. And the council has been keen on involving the private sector because the SDGs are important and they do involve the private sector as a trusted partner. So message from the interpretation, there is a technical problem because of the connection of the speaker from Morocco. So there was a great importance given to the SDGs by the state of Morocco. There were several meetings held within the council with the private sector as well, knowing that the private sector is not under the control of the
envoyer une série de questionnaires afin qu'ils répondent à des questions bien précises. Merci pour cette contribution fort précieuse et qui met en relief ce que vous avez fait au niveau de l'audit de performance et comment vous avez impliqué les différentes parties prenantes. Je pense
I move to Dr. Saad al-Burqadi, who is on mission assignment with the Prime Minister responsible for following up on the implementation of the NDGs from the Prime Minister's office in Morocco. My question to you, sir, is how do you evaluate the role of SIE in your country? And I hope that the participants would mute their microphones because there is the sound is not very clear. So we need the participants please to mute themselves. Excuse me, a message from the English booth, interpretation booth. We cannot hear at all the gentleman from Morocco. There is a problem with the connection. We're very sorry. Again, I am the interpreter. I am the interpreter. I am the interpreter. Please, I cannot close the microphone. There is a problem from the side of the speaker from Morocco. There is a problem in the sound of the speaker from Morocco. We repeat.
سيد البرقادي هل ممكن التخلص إزالة الإيرفونز والتكلم مباشرة جيد تفضل تسمعوني يعني أحسن قليلا
A message from the interpretation booth. No, I cannot hear the participant. We're very sorry. We apologize.
هذه الفرصة للحديث على مساهمة
Again, message from the
المملكة المغربية في تنفيذ أهداف التنمية المستدامة. يعني بدءا أود التذكير.
So first, I would like to remind you that the SAI in Morocco is a higher constitutional independent institute that is independent from the legislative and executive powers. And in this framework, the institute within its functions is called upon to prepare reports in different fields. And this is what led to the creation or the launch of the very important report on the preparedness of the Moroccan government in the
disponibilité du Maroc à
then this framework, the report was within the commitment of the Kingdom of Morocco that was expressed by His Majesty the King and the government in the implementation of the 2030 agenda. The report was a snapshot or an overview about where we are in the implementation of the 2030 agenda in Morocco. We can say that the accomplishment of this report was a very important contribution, specifically in this timing at the beginning of 2019. Why? Because we can say as an executive power that this report has put the train of realizing the 2030 agenda in Morocco on the right track, because we need to recognize that there was an attention given to the implementation of the 2030 agenda at first, but it was a very modest attention and focus. So this report was the blow that was dealt to the Moroccan government that uh, and it made Morocco or the government of Morocco realize the importance of the governance and the importance of the realization of the SDGs in Morocco. And within the census system also in Morocco, which was also a very important part of this process. And this is what was the focus of the report of the SAI. As a Moroccan government, we have taken this issue very interactively and positively, and we recognized the lagging behind when the report or when the decision was taken at the beginning of 2019. After the report, we made strides and we accelerated the realization, especially that the Moroccan government was already preparing the voluntary national report of 2030. And we can say that the contribution of the Supreme Audit Institute as a summary or as a conclusion was a very positive contribution, and it helped Morocco to prepare a national report that is up to the level of the kingdom and that gives a clear vision and a clear picture about the importance of achieving and realizing all sustainable development goals in Morocco. As my friend Mr. Hanin mentioned, for the future, we need or we want that the reports of the SAI on the SDGs would become periodic and would be able to shed light on some objectives very accurately so that we can evolve. And we know that in Morocco there is a great interaction between the SAI and the Moroccan government, and this is why we feel that the contribution of the SAI in the implementation of the 2030 agenda is a very important contribution, and it can only be positive so far. Thank you. Thank you, sir, for shedding light on how the SAI
de l'Institut supérieur de contrôle au Maroc dans la mise en œuvre des
I move now to Mr. Mohammed bin Hamdan bin Saeed bin Hamad Al Jabiri. Again, the question about the main achievements and the lessons learned, in addition to the recommendations from the audits in when it comes to the preparation and the realization, preparedness and the realization of the SDGs. And that was also taken by the Arab OSI. I want you to give us an idea about the role of the SAIs in the Arab countries. The floor is yours. Go ahead. Thank you, Mr. Karam. First, as my colleague said, the audit institutes played a major role in this regard. There's no doubt about this. And as a brief answer for this question, as I am member uh, of the Arab side, we have taken samples from Iraq, Jordan, Tunisia, Sudan, Morocco, and in addition to two other countries. And we have taken stock of the preparedness reports that these institutes have implemented for the governments. And we looked at the main conclusions and recommendations. And I'm going to review them here for the public. The first thing is for the methodology that was already adopted by the Arab institutes in the preparation of this report that were built on the Entosai methodology based on the 7 points. These points show the political commitment, first and foremost, of the countries in the implementation of the SDGs and the mechanisms that were taken in this regard. Second, the attention given to awareness raising of the sustainable development and the involvement of the multiple stakeholders, and also to measure the integration of the SDGs in the national plans and preparing the required plans for that, the efficiency of the responsibilities, the distribution, and in order to achieve these SDGs, and the planning and launching the audit and measure tools, and last but not least, the audit and the reporting of the progress made with all the stakeholders. Based on these 7 points, the Arab audit institutes within the sample have measured the preparedness of the government. And the most important results that we have achieved or we have seen in these institutes can be briefly summarized in the following. A reasonable preparedness among the governments to achieve the agenda and to realize the objectives. It is a reasonable preparedness, but not the required preparedness through the implementation or in integrating the SDGs and the national plans for these countries, and informing all the stakeholders, also to create specific committees according to every country about the follow-up of the implementations of the Sustainable Development Goals. Among the other results, the unclear link between the SDGs and the development plan for some countries, and this makes it difficult to follow up sometimes, and leads to a lack of clarity when it comes to the national plan and how they plan to realize the SDGs. And to talk about the financing that is required for the implementation of these goals, and including that, in addition, also to raise awareness. There are some countries and governments that have made or launched some awareness raising campaigns, for example, national seminars about the preparation of the national plans and the inclusion of the SDGs in the national plans. The lack of clarity about the adopted mechanisms in order uh, to divide the responsibilities, and the lack of communication tools between the government and the non-governmental organizations that have to implement the plans. There are some countries who have some measuring census and national indicators, but there are some countries who haven't done so. There is a lack of clarity also among the majority of the Arab governments about who is in charge of the evaluation, monitoring, and reporting of the progress made in the implementation of the SDGs. So based on these results and outcomes, the audit reports have included a set of important recommendations. Among them, the audit institutes have recommended the national governments to elaborate a national plan that seeks the realization of the SDGs and to continue raising the awareness of the society about the SDGs and the 2030 agenda with all the methods available, and to determine the stakeholders that have to implement the SDGs and the parties who have to evaluate and monitor, and to provide multiple sources of financing for the implementation of the SDGs, and to create financial plans that are ambitious, in addition to also show the progress made in the realization of the SDGs. Mr. Karam, I can say here that the Arab Audit Institutes have been able to diagnose the different challenges and obstacles that the Arab governments are facing now in the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals, and they have provided recommendations that are very, very important. And if there is a response on the part of the Arab governments with these recommendations, as our colleague from Morocco said, there will have a very important and positive impact in the implementation of the SDGs and improving development in the Arab countries. Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir, for this clarification and for the results that you have reached through monitoring what 7 countries have done when it comes to the monitoring of the preparedness of the governments and the implementation of the 2030 agenda. I move now to another direct subject, a very timely issue, which is public health. And we asked the question to Mrs. Majdoline Samour, who is the head of the Performance Audit Division from the State of Palestine, about how the SAIs contribute to public health resilience through the audit of SDG target 3D. It is within the goal number 3 about health. I give you the floor, Mrs. Marjorie. Good evening, good afternoon, everyone. I thank you, Mr. Karam, for having us today, and I thank all the participants. The COVID pandemic has shown how the systemic silos and fragmentation of effort and sharpened inequalities adversely affect the government's ability to deal with a pandemic like this. This is why the audit on 3D or the SDGs 3D will focus on the government efforts to build back better. And the audits will examine the audits of the SAIs will examine how governments are learning lessons from the current crisis and putting in place integrated public health services which are resilient and equitable. 10 SAIs in the Arab Westside, Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, Libya, Sudan, the Sultanate of Oman, Palestine, Iraq, and Kuwait are conducting this audit in addition to 30 SAIs in the Asia Pacific and the Caribbean as well. It is expected that the institutes conducting the audit to provide high quality and timely conclusions. These conclusions and recommendations will be independent and evidence-based on how government has acted on lessons learned to enhance capacities. And this is in order to forecast, prevent, and prepare for public health emergencies, to adapt, to absorb, and respond to public health emergencies, the PACs, in addition to maintaining essential health services during emergency crises. However, the SAI recommendations alone cannot contribute to public health resilience. They need a coalition of stakeholders who will work together to ensure that the recommendations are implemented by those in charge of governance. The impact of audit is essential for SAI contribution to public health resilience. And the IDI is committed to supporting SAIs in conducting high quality and high impact 3D audits. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mrs. Masjouline Samour, for your presentation and for your briefing on how SAI contribute to public health resilience through the audit of SDG Target 3D. I would like to give the floor again to Mr. Abdul Mohsen Hani. The question is the following. What are the main challenges you have encountered in overseeing the Moroccan government's preparedness? In brief, how can you sum up these challenges? Thank you, Karam. Actually, we have encountered a number of difficulties, and they can be summed up as follows. The preparedness audit was conducted as part of a review process. We oversaw the work of different audit institutions. We tried to understand the different aspects of the work. On the other hand, we faced another difficulty in following up on the implementation of SDGs. There were a number of difficulties. Mainly with the implementation of reforms. We had to cooperate with different stakeholders. We tried to cooperate with the civil society and civil society organizations. We faced a number of legal difficulties and impediments. With respect to civil society organizations, we faced a different set of difficulties. We have more than 150,000 civil society organizations, so that's why we encountered difficulties in interacting with this broad range of civil society organizations. But despite these challenges and difficulties, we emphasize the importance of cooperating with multiple stakeholders. Our audit court also pursued its preparedness audit and continued to play its vital role in this. We are aware of the important role of different stakeholders to play this and to carry out this mission. What are the key findings we have reached? Actually, we have reached positive results and findings as follows. There is a clear political commitment to implementing the SDGs, and this is quite reflected in the speech of His Royal Highness. We also have a legal and constitutional commitment to the implementation of the SDGs and Agenda 2030. There's also a legal responsibility for different stakeholders. This is a right enshrined for the people. This is a constitutional right enshrined, and the responsibility falls on the government and different stakeholders. Can you please slow down to help interpreters? So there's the legal and constitutional commitment. So in our constitution, we have a commitment to implementing the SDGs, and this is a commitment that is a right also for the people.
قانون إطار يتحدث عن التنمية المستدامة.
Nous avons également établi une loi cadre portant sur le développement durable.
The government. We also strive to create a better climate conducive to the implementation of Agenda 2030 and the SDGs. However, The audit court has identified a number of priorities as well. We lack a governance national environment with respect to communication and outreach. We have failed to engage different stakeholders, including from the civil society and from the private sector.
وسجلنا كذلك الانخراط غير الكافي للحكومات المحليه والمجتمع المدني. اما فيما يتعلق بالمجال الاحصائي فكما تعلمون
With respect to statistics,
مؤشرات اهداف التنميه المستدامه هو الوسيله الكفيله لقياس تقدم المحافظ.
as you know, statistics are important to overseeing the implementation, the follow-up, and the review of SDGs. Within this framework, the audit court has reached a series of findings and conclusions.
المندوبيه الساميه للتخطيط كجهاز وطني للإحصائيات يعتبر نواة النظام الإحصائي الوطني تتوفر المؤهلات الضروريه لتقييم التقدم الحاصل في تنفيذ الاهداف. كذلك سجلنا وعي مختلف مكونات النظام الإحصائي الوطني.
The speaker is not audible. It's very hard to interpret.
بوضع وتتبع المنهجيات والمقاربات المتعلقه بتحديد المؤشرات. الا ان المجلس سجل انه يجب ملائمه الاطار القانوني ضمن المجال الاحصائي. هناك كذلك الحاجه لتطوير اجراءات مراقبه الجوده واطلاق الطبع الرسمي عليها. وسجل كذلك غياب رؤيه فيما يتعلق بالاجراءات التي يتم القيام بها لوضع قائمه البيانات المرجعيه ووضع اتخاذ الاجراءات الكفيله بانتاج مختلف المعطيات. بالنسبه للتوصيات بعجاله فبين التوصيات المهمه هو ضروره احداث هيئه وطنيه
I will
لضمان
try to address recommendations in brief. We need to engage different stakeholders at the national and regional level. The SDGs should be also aligned with the national context. The local laws should be also harmonized. And finally, the track should be put in place in order to align the SDGs and Agenda 2030.
وتنظيم لقاء ثاني كذلك بطلب من مختلف ممثلي هيئه الامم المتحده في المغرب.
We will be holding a series of meetings at the request of His Royal Highness. The Parliament also discussed the outcome of the expert meeting. The audit court was called upon by the government to undertake reforms. Thank you for your kind attention. Thank you, Mr. Hanin. This drives me to Mr. Bulkadi. I would like to ask you about your approach to the government reports. Mr. Bulkadi, please try to be as brief as possible because we need to open the floor to questions from the participants.
الصوت غير مسموع.
We cannot hear you. Is this better? No, it's not audible.
تسمعونني؟ جيد؟
تفضل.
اعتذر يعني لا ادري مش
I apologize. I'm not sure what the problem is. So to answer your question, Mr. Karam, we were positive about the report. The audit court's report was well received. we did not take it negatively. On the contrary, we embraced this report. In our opinion, this report presents
une possibilité d'avancer et de profiter.
التقرير رسميا كانت هناك مراسلات بين المجلس الأعلى للحسابات.
Before the report was officially released, we coordinated with the government. This happened in end 2018. The report was released in February 2019, i.e. around 2 days prior to a meeting of the National Committee for Sustainable Development. So the report release was very timely, if I may say so, and it gave an additional momentum to the National Committee's meeting. As you know, the committee brought together representatives from different government institutions. As I've already mentioned, the report was positively and well received. The report put Morocco on the right track towards the implementation of the SDGs and the 2030 agenda. On 23 February, we analyzed the recommendations and the findings of the audit court's report. We discussed the different points raised in the report, including the fact that we did not have a governmental authority to coordinate the implementation of the SDGs. This was a key point that we adopted, but it took us quite some time to act on this. The report put us on the right track towards the implementation of the SDGs. It served as a benchmark also for comparison with the international experiences. We conducted initial consultations with independent and private sector bodies and entities in Morocco. We also coordinated with several different bodies. We consulted with them on their perspectives and views, and we sought to promulgate a new decree engaging multiple stakeholders involved in sustainable development and who were not represented in the first strategic committee on sustainable development. A new decree was promulgated almost 3 months after the official report was released. So in June, we adopted at the government level a new decree addressing the shortcomings and the difficulties, mainly at the level of the governance in implementing sustainable development goals. The new decree also framed the work of the committee in charge of overseeing the implementation of SDGs within the framework of the higher committee led by the ministry in charge of sustainable development. The committee itself brings together different government institutions and almost all sectors. It also includes the higher committee for planning as an independent and autonomous entity in charge of reporting on SDGs and also on review. The higher committee is also in charge of our statistics work. The new decree engaged the private sector in two big committees, and it also vested the committee in charge of implementing the SDGs different responsibilities for the implementation of the Agenda 2030. So this is in brief what we have done in Morocco. As I've already said, the report has positively contributed to the implementation of SDGs. The audit court has provided us with 8 key recommendations, including on governance. There are other recommendations about outreach, and communication. We are still working at this front. There were also some recommendations about aligning the SDGs with the national plans. We are still working on this. We are currently about to embark on overseeing and reviewing the national plans jointly with the different ministries. We will assess our national strategy for sustainable development with respect to our statistical system, and in response to a recommendation by the audit court, we promulgated a new law. As the law is currently in Parliament, so the Parliament still has to enact this law, but as a government, we have finalized this law. Thank you, Mr. Burkardi. I would like to thank the panelists for their valuable contributions, which draw a clear and in-depth picture of the very important role that Supreme Audit Institutes are carrying out in following up the implementation of SDGs from preparedness to key achievements on the ground. Thank you for your valuable contributions that shed light on the methodologies adopted and how sectors, for instance, the health sector is carrying out follow-up. We also took a case study. We focused on the case study of Morocco and how the government reacts to the different audit court reports. In the time left for us before we conclude our session, so in the next 20 minutes, I will open the floor for participants. If they have any questions they would like to ask, you may write down your questions in the chat box, or possibly you can raise your hand and then unmute yourself. So I'm currently opening the floor to all participants to ask their questions either in writing or by raising a hand.
يعني أعود وأذكر أنه يمكن لحضرات
This is a gentle reminder to all participants and followers. You can ask your questions in relation to this special session on auditing the sustainable development goals in the Arab region. Dear participants, you may ask your questions to the panelists involved in this special session. You can write your questions in the chat box, or you may raise a hand. There is one question, I think. There is one question about the Supreme Audit Institutes and how they contribute to respecting the principle of leaving no one behind. I think the different panelists have already shed light on this additional dimension. Supreme Audit Institutes do play a key and vital role in ensuring that no one is left behind. There is another question. Can the Supreme Audit Institute's mandate impede their role in overseeing the implementation of the SDGs? I'm not sure which of the panelists would like to answer this question. So they have two questions, and I leave the choice to the panelists to choose who will respond to these two questions. Mr. Mahmoud Ataya has asked this question: can the Supreme Audit Institute's mandate hinder their role in overseeing the implementation of the SDGs? So this is the question, and I'm not sure which panelists would like to answer this question. Mr. Muhammad, please go ahead. Thank you, Mr. Karam. I would like to answer this question. Of course, the Supreme Audit Institutes should have a legally instituted, clear legal mandate. Without this mandate, they will not be able to oversee the implementation of the SDGs, and they will not be able to carry out their audit functions. Without this mandate, Supreme Audit Institutes will not be able to perform their audit functions. They will not be able also to muster a cooperation of different stakeholders, and they will not be able to access required data. Definitely, this is one of the challenges all Supreme Audit Institutes should have and should seek clear and full-fledged mandate. Without this mandate, Supreme Audit Institutes will not be able to perform successful audit functions. At the end of the day, Supreme Audit Institutes are independent from the government. Their recommendations and findings are credible, impartial, and not biased. So this is in brief my response to this question. Thank you. I would like to give the floor now to Mrs. Masjadin Samour to answer this question. In fact, I would like to answer the question about leaving no one behind. Supreme Audit Institutes should ensure that no one is left behind. Supreme Audit Institutes analyze and cooperate with the different stakeholders. They undertake horizontal and vertical analysis involving governments and non-government actors such as NGOs and other partner organizations. At the horizontal level also, the Supreme Audit Institutes cooperate with the government, the parliament, the legislative authorities, and also the authorities in charge. There was also another question about indicators and how audit can be undertaken in the absence of measurement indicators. Needless to say, the auditors have the power to deduce criteria and standards. They can follow best practices, and they can agree with the parties to be audited on the standards that will be adopted. Thank you, Mr. Samour. Before I give the floor to Mr. Abdel Hakim bin Lazrak, we have two additional questions. The first question: how important is it for Supreme Audit Institutes to cooperate with healthcare specialists in order to ensure the implementation of SDGs? And the second question, is there a timeline to ensure the implementation of SDGs? So do the preparedness audits follow a specific deadline or timeline? So these are the two questions for now. Mr. Ben Lazrak, please go ahead if you'd like to answer any of these questions.
شكرا أستاذ كرم.
Thank you, Mr. Karam.
الحقيقة العديد من الأسئلة الهامة والهامة جدا.
All of these questions are important, nay, very important, and these questions reflect how interested the participants are in this topic. I will try to answer almost all of these questions, starting with indicators and measurement indicators. Undoubtedly, indicators play a key role in auditing. As you all know, with respect to the SDGs entail an outcomes framework that encompasses the goals, the targets, and the indicators. So the indicators are an integral part of the SDGs and are also part of the outcome framework. The auditors can adopt some of these indicators if they are relevant. But if these indicators are not fit for purpose, then of course the auditor can resort to best practices and can discuss with the audited parties and with different stakeholders to identify the appropriate indicators. But an agreement should reach on these indicators if they are not available. With respect to the question about leaving no one behind, I believe that this is a two-faced question. The multiple stakeholders should take into account the principle of the principle of leaving no one behind. It's a responsibility of the stakeholders when they identify the targets and when they identify the means of implementation, then they should cater for the principle of leaving no one behind. The auditor himself should take this principle into account as well. For instance, the auditor should seek the views of the vulnerable groups in audit, and also when the time comes for proposing recommendations, the auditor should open up, should reach out for the vulnerable and marginalized groups to make sure that his recommendations reflect the problems they face. There was another question about training. This is important. Karam is interrupting. There was actually a very important question, and I hope that you would answer them in brief. These two questions are intertwined. To what extent are Supreme Audit Institutes capable of overseeing the implementation of SDGs while noting that these goals are broad and their implementation is extensive? So, how can Supreme Audit Institutes perform this role? And should the Supreme Audit Institutes, for instance, focus on specific goals and not on all the goals, possibly the goals related to health? A very valid question. We had a meeting prior to this special session and we discussed this issue. Supreme Audit Institutes do not have to audit all the goals, but the Supreme Audit Institutes should choose the most appropriate goals. The decision is left to the Supreme Audit Institute. There are different risks that need to be taken into account. For instance, they should take some factors into account. To what extent can the Supreme Audit Institutes carry out the function, for instance? Do they have capacity? So there are several factors that need to be factored in and that need to be taken into account before an audit decision is taken. But needless to say, an audit should not cover all goals. I'm very proud because I facilitated this very important special session. We are about to wrap up this session. I will try in 1 minute to sum up what I have deduced from this special session. I would like to share with you 2 or 3 takeaways from this session. And after this session is over, we will share with you key messages that will be incorporated into the general messages.
عن أجهزة الدولة الحكومية الأخرى المعنية بمتابعة تنفيذ أهداف التنمية المستدامة، وأعتقد أن هذه الاستقلالية
I believe that this autonomy is vital and essential since It has added value to the reports issued by the SAIs because they are issued by autonomous institutions, and this autonomy imbues the work of these institutions with objectivity, transparency, and efficiency when it comes to the monitoring of the implementation of the SDGs. However, this autonomy requires three things at the bare minimum. First, as Mr. Muhammad said, prerogatives given by law, clear prerogatives given to these institutions, allowing them to fulfill their work in a transparent and cooperative manner without any conflict of interest, providing it with the competencies and skills that it needs in order for it to fulfill its work as an institution in monitoring and following up on the implementation of the SDGs. And three, cooperation with the various stakeholders on one hand, while also availing the data and necessary information through CSOs and state institutions. So in short, this is what I actually wrote down based on what I heard. However, this session was a very rich one, and I thank you all for that. I believe we now need to wrap up this session, and so I call upon you to participate in the plenary session, which will highlight the third objective tomorrow, which has to do with health between 10 and 11 a.m. Beirut timing. Thank you all once again. I wish you a pleasant day.